The sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink when Tom Morrison finished loading the last bale of hay into the storage shed. After 23 years of working ranches across Texas, he had developed a routine that was as natural as breathing. Check the water troughs, secure the gates, count the cattle, and make one final walk around the property before heading home to his small cabin, Clearwater. Ranch had been his home for the past 5 years. It wasn't the biggest spread he'd worked, but it was peaceful. The owner, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Rodriguez, trusted Tom completely. This trust meant everything to a man who had spent most of his adult life proving himself worthy of such. Confidence. As Tom walked toward the main barn, something caught his eye in the fading light. At first, he thought it might be one of the ranch horses that had somehow gotten out of the pasture. But as he got closer, his experienced eye immediately noticed this wasn't one of their animals. A horse stood near the barn entrance, but this wasn't just any horse. This Murray was in terrible condition. Her dark brown coat was matted with dried mud and what looked like blood. Scratches covered her legs and sides, some still weeping slightly. She was thin, too thin, like she hadn't eaten properly in days or maybe weeks. Tom stopped about 20 feet away, not wanting to spook her. Wild horses weren't uncommon in this part of Texas, but they usually stayed far from human settlements. This one was different. She wasn't acting like a wild horse at all. The Mare turned her head toward him, and Tom felt a chill run down his spine. Her eyes held something he had rarely seen in an animal, a kind of desperate intelligence. She wasn't afraid of him. Instead, she seemed to be studying him as if she was trying to figure out if he was the right person for something important. Tom had worked with horses his entire adult life. He could read their body language like most people read books. This Murray wasn't just injured and tired. She was on a mission. "Easy there, girl," Tom said softly, keeping his voice calm and low. "What are you doing way out here?" The horse took a step toward him, then stopped. She turned her head toward the barn door, then back to Tom. She did this several times, and each time her movements became more deliberate, more insistent. Tom had seen horses do strange things before. He'd watched them mourn their dead, protect their young with fierce determination, and show loyalty that put most humans to shame. But this behavior was something entirely new. The Mara moved closer to the barn entrance and began pawing at the ground with her front hoof. Not the nervous pawing of an anxious animal, but purposeful, rhythmic strikes against the dirt. She would paw, then look at Tom, then at the barn door. "You want me to open the barn?" Tom asked, feeling slightly foolish for talking to a horse. As if she could understand complex sentences, the Mare's ears perked forward, and she took another step toward the door. This time she let out a soft whinny, not the high-pitched call of distress, but something lower, more urgent. Tom approached slowly, keeping his hands visible and his movements predictable. As he got closer, he could see the full extent of her injuries. Deep scratches ran along her flanks, and there was a particularly nasty cut on her left front leg that looked infected. Her hooves were worn down from traveling over rocky ground. "Where did you come from, girl?" he murmured, reaching into his pocket for the sugar cubes he always carried. Most horses couldn't resist them, but when he held out his hand, the Murray barely glanced at the treat. Instead, she moved directly to the barn door and pressed her nose against the heavy wooden surface. She turned to look at Tom again, and this time there was no mistaking her message. Tom had been around animals long enough to trust his instincts, and every instinct he had was telling him that this horse was trying to tell him something important. But opening the barn to let in a strange, possibly sick animal went against every rule of ranch management he'd ever learned. The Mare seemed to sense his hesitation. She moved away from the door and came closer to Tom, close enough that he could feel her warm breath on his arm. Up close, her condition looked even worse. She was exhausted, probably dehydrated, and definitely in pain. Yet she had used what might have been her last reserves of strength to come here, to this barn, to find him. Tom looked into her eyes again. In his years of working with horses, he had learned to read the subtle differences in their expressions. This Murray's eyes held something he had only seen a few times before. The look of an animal that had found a purpose bigger than its own survival. "All right, girl," he said finally, reaching for the large metal latch on the barn door. I don't know what you're trying to show me, but you've convinced me it's important. The moment his hand touched the latch, the Mare stepped back and waited. She didn't try to push past him or rush toward the door. She simply waited, as if she knew that the next few moments would change everything. Tom slid the heavy latch to one side and pulled the door open. The barn had been mostly unused for the past few months, serving mainly as storage for old equipment and extra feed. It smelled of dust and old hay, with just a hint of the motor oil from the tractor that was parked in the far corner. The Mare immediately stepped into the barn, but she didn't wander aimlessly. She moved with the confidence of an animal that knew exactly where she was going. Tom followed, his boots echoing on the wooden floor as they moved deeper into the barn. Tom began to hear something that made his heart rate quicken. At first, he thought it might be mice or maybe a cat that had gotten trapped inside. But as they got closer to the back of the barn, the sound became clearer. It was crying. Soft, weak, but definitely human crying. Tom's blood ran cold. The Mare continued walking toward the sound, and now Tom understood why she had been so insistent. She hadn't come here for herself. She had come here for someone else. The back of the barn was filled with old hay bales stacked against the walls. The Mare led him directly to a corner where the bales created a small, sheltered space. As Tom peered around the edge of the hay, his breath caught in his throat. What he saw there would stay with him for the rest of his life, and it would forever change how he thought about the intelligence and compassion of animals. The brave Mare beside him had just proven that sometimes heroes come in the most unexpected forms. Tom's heart pounded as he stared at what lay hidden behind the old hay bales. There, in a makeshift nest of torn blankets and scattered straw, was a small child, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, curled up in a ball, unconscious but breathing. His mind raced as he tried to process what he was seeing. How had a child ended up in this abandoned corner of the barn? And more importantly, how had this injured horse known she was here? The Mare stood quietly beside him, no longer showing the urgent behavior from outside. Now she seemed calm, almost relieved, as if she had finally completed a mission that had been weighing heavily on her. She lowered her head and gently sniffed toward the child, then looked up at Tom with those intelligent eyes that had convinced him to open the barn door. Tom dropped to his knees beside the little girl, his ranch hand instincts kicking in. He had basic first aid training from his years working in remote areas where the nearest hospital was hours away. The child was alive, but her breathing was shallow and her skin felt cold to the touch. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said softly, gently shaking her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" The girl didn't respond, but Tom could see she was severely dehydrated. Her lips were cracked and dry, and when he carefully lifted one of her eyelids, her eyes had the sunken look of someone who hadn't had water in far too long. Tom's mind immediately went to his cell phone, but he knew there was no signal this deep in the ranch property. He would have to get her to the main house to call for help. But first, he needed to understand how she had gotten here and how long she had been in this condition. As he examined the makeshift shelter more closely, Tom began to piece together an incredible story. The blankets wrapped around the child weren't torn randomly. They had been carefully arranged, almost like a nest. There were small puddles of water near the child's head, as if someone had been bringing her water drop by drop. Most shocking of all, there were hoof prints in the soft dirt around the shelter. Not just any hoof prints, but the distinctive marks of the Mare standing beside him. The injured horse had been coming and going from this spot regularly. Tom looked at the Mare with new understanding. "You've been taking care of her, haven't you, girl?" The horse's ears twitched forward, and she moved closer to the child. With incredible gentleness, she lowered her massive head and breathed softly on the little girl's face. It was the behavior of a mother comforting her young, except this was a wild horse caring for a human child. The child stirred slightly at the warm breath, and Tom saw her eyelids flutter. She was responsive, which was a good sign, but she was clearly in serious trouble. He needed to get her medical attention immediately. "I'm going to pick her up now," Tom told the Mare, speaking to her as if she could understand every word. She needs help that I can't give her here. As Tom carefully lifted the child, the Mare stepped back but didn't move away. The little girl was light, too light, and her clothes were dirty and torn. She had clearly been lost for several days, maybe. Longer. The child's eyes opened briefly as Tom cradled her, and she whispered something so quietly he could barely hear it. "Horsey," she said, her voice barely more than a breath. Tom's throat tightened with emotion. Even in her weakened state, the first thing this little girl thought of was the horse that had been protecting her. The bond between them was obvious, even to someone who had just discovered them. "Yes, sweetheart," Tom said gently. "The horsey found you. She brought me here to help you." As Tom carried the child toward the barn entrance, the Mare followed closely behind. She was limping badly on her injured leg, but she refused to be left behind. Every few steps she would move her head close to the child, as if checking to make sure she was still breathing. Outside the barn, Tom's truck was parked about 50 yards away. The walk felt like miles as he tried to move quickly without jostling the unconscious child. The Mare kept pace beside him, despite her obvious pain. When they reached the truck, Tom faced a dilemma. He needed to get the child to medical help as fast as possible, but he couldn't abandon the horse that had saved her life. The Mare was clearly in bad shape herself, and after what she had done, she deserved care too. Tom made a decision that would have surprised anyone who knew him as a practical, no-nonsense ranch hand. He opened the passenger door of his truck and carefully placed the child on the seat, securing her with the seatbelt. Then he walked around to the truck bed and lowered the tailgate. "Come on, girl," he called to the Mare. "You're coming with us." Loading a horse into a pickup truck was not something Tom had ever attempted before. Most horses would never willingly climb into such a confined space, but this Mare was different. She seemed to understand that the child needed help, and she was willing to do whatever it took to stay with her. With some coaxing and a lot of patience, the Mare actually stepped into the truck bed. She was unsteady on her feet, and Tom could see the effort it cost her. But she was determined to stay close to the child she had been protecting. As Tom drove toward the main ranch house, he kept glancing in his rearview mirror at the Mare. She had positioned herself so she could see through the back window of the truck cab, keeping watch over the little girl even during the bumpy ride. The child drifted in and out of consciousness during the 20-minute drive, but each time she woke up, she would look around frantically until she spotted the Mare through the window. Only then would she relax again. Tom's mind was racing with questions as he drove. Where had this child come from? How had she ended up alone in the wilderness? And how had a wild horse not only found her but decided to become her protector? The local news had been reporting about a missing child for the past week. A family had been camping in the national forest about 30 miles away when their daughter had wandered off and never returned. Search teams had been combing the area for days without finding any trace of her. Could this be the same child? The timeline seemed to match, and 30 miles was certainly within the range of a determined horse. But if that was true, it meant this Mare had somehow found the lost child, kept her alive for nearly a week, and then brought her to the only place where she knew humans could be found. As they pulled up to the ranch house, Tom could see lights on in the windows. Mr. Rodriguez was probably still awake, reading in his favorite chair by the fireplace. Tom had never been more grateful for the old man's habit of staying up late. The story that was about to unfold would challenge everything Tom thought he knew about animal intelligence and compassion. But for now, all that mattered was getting help for both the child and the remarkable horse that had refused to give up on her. Tom burst through the front door of the ranch house, carrying the unconscious child in his arms. The familiar warmth and light of the living room felt surreal after what he had just discovered in the barn. Mr. Rodriguez looked up from his evening newspaper, his reading glasses sliding down his nose as he took in the shocking scene. "Tom, what in the world?" the elderly ranch owner started to say, but Tom was already moving toward the kitchen where he knew the landline phone was mounted on the wall. "Call 911, Tom said urgently, placing the child gently on the couch. "We need an ambulance out here. Right away. I found a little girl in the barn and she's in bad shape." Mr. Rodriguez dropped his newspaper and hurried to the phone while Tom knelt beside the couch, checking the child's pulse and breathing. Her heartbeat was weak but steady, and her breathing had become slightly more regular since being moved to the warm house. "This is Rodriguez Ranch on County Road 47, Mr. Rodriguez spoke into the phone. "We need emergency medical services immediately. We have an unconscious child, approximately 7 years old, showing signs of severe dehydration." While they waited for the ambulance, Tom quickly explained what had happened. The story sounded impossible even as he told it, but Mr. Rodriguez had known Tom for 5 years and trusted his judgment completely. "You're telling me a wild horse led you to this child?" Mr. Rodriguez asked, his weathered face showing amazement. "I know how it sounds," Tom replied, gently placing a damp cloth on the little girl's forehead. "But I'm telling you, that Mari knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to get help for this kid." Through the window, they could see the horse still standing in the back of Tom's truck. Even from a distance, it was clear she was watching the house, waiting to see what would happen to the child she had protected. The sound of sirens in the distance brought relief, but also new concerns. Tom knew that once the authorities arrived, questions would be asked that he couldn't answer. How long had the child been in the barn? Where had she come from? And what would happen to the horse that had saved her life? The ambulance pulled into the ranch driveway with its lights flashing, followed closely by a sheriff's deputy. The paramedics rushed into the house with their equipment, and soon the quiet living room was filled with urgent medical activity. "How long has she been unconscious?" asked the lead paramedic, a woman with kind eyes who immediately began checking the child's vital signs. "I don't know," Tom admitted. "I found her about an hour ago. She's been drifting in and out, but mostly unconscious." The paramedic worked quickly, checking the child's blood pressure and starting in 4 to address the dehydration. "She's stable, but she needs to get to the hospital immediately. This level of dehydration is serious." As they prepared to transport the child, she stirred again and opened her eyes. This time she was more alert, looking around frantically at all the unfamiliar faces surrounding her. "Horsey," she whispered, just as she had in the barn. "Where's my Horsey?" Tom moved closer to where she could see him. "The horse is right outside, sweetheart. She's safe. She brought me to find you." The child's eyes filled with tears, but they seemed to be tears of relief rather than fear. "She stayed with me," the little girl said, her voice getting stronger. "When I got lost, she found me and stayed with me." The sheriff's deputy, a tall man named Officer Williams, had been taking notes throughout the medical emergency. Now he approached Tom with a serious expression. "I need to understand exactly what happened here," Officer Williams said. "We've had search teams looking for a missing child for almost a week. If this is who I think it is, her family has been worried sick." Tom told the story again, this time in more detail. He explained about the Mari's strange behavior, how she had led him to the barn and what he had found there. Officer Williams listened intently, occasionally glancing out the window at the horse in the truck. "The missing child was last seen at a campground about 30 miles northeast of here," the officer said. "The family reported that their daughter Lucy wandered away from their campsite 6 days ago. Search and rescue teams have been combing that entire area." As they spoke, the paramedics were loading the child onto a stretcher. She kept looking toward the window, clearly worried about the horse that had become her protector. "Can the Horsey come with me?" Lucy asked the paramedics. The female paramedic smiled gently. "Horses can't ride in ambulances, honey. But I promise someone will take good care of her." Tom made a decision that surprised even himself. "I'll follow you to the hospital," he told the paramedics. "And I'll bring the horse. That little girl has been through enough. She shouldn't have to worry about what's going to happen to the animal." "That saved her life." Officer Williams looked skeptical. "You can't bring a horse to a hospital, Tom." "Maybe not into the building," Tom replied, "but I can keep her nearby." That child trusted that Murray with her life for almost a week. "The least we can do is make sure they don't get separated now." As the ambulance pulled away with its precious cargo, Tom faced a new challenge. The Murray was still in the back of his truck, but she was clearly exhausted and in pain. Her injuries needed attention, but Tom knew that any veterinarian he called would want to know where the horse had come from and whether she belonged to anyone. Mr. Rodriguez appeared beside Tom with a cup of coffee and a thoughtful expression. "That horse needs medical attention too," the older man observed. "I know," Tom replied, "but I'm not sure how to explain this whole situation to a vet. Do I tell them I have a wild horse that's been playing nursemaid to a lost child?" "You tell them the truth," Mr. Rodriguez said simply. "And if they don't believe you, you bring them here and show them the evidence." Tom looked back toward the barn, where he knew they would find clear signs of what had been happening. The hoof prints, the arranged blankets, the water stains where the Mary had been bringing drinks to the child drop by drop. "The thing I can't figure out," Tom said, "is how that horse knew to bring the child here. This ranch is miles from where she was supposed to be camping. How did a wild Mari know that this was the place where humans would help?" Mr. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, watching the injured horse in the truck bed. "Maybe," he said finally, "some animals understand more about humans than we give them credit for. Maybe she saw the lights from the house or smelled the smoke from our chimney and knew it meant people lived here." As Tom started his truck to follow the ambulance to the hospital, the Mare shifted in the truck bed, positioning herself to look forward through the cab window. It was as if she understood they were going to be reunited with the child she had protected. The 40-minute drive to the county hospital gave Tom time to think about everything that had happened. By the time they arrived, he had made several important decisions that would change the lives of everyone involved in this incredible story. The county hospital parking lot was nearly empty when Tom arrived with the injured Mare still in the back of his truck. The fluorescent lights from the emergency room cast long shadows across the asphalt, and Tom could see through the glass doors that there was already a commotion inside. Word about the found child had clearly spread quickly. Tom parked his truck in a spot where he could see the hospital entrance, but far enough away that the Mare wouldn't be disturbed by the constant flow of people. As he climbed out of the cab, he could hear the horse shifting restlessly in the truck bed. She was clearly anxious about being separated from Lucy. Inside the hospital, the scene was both heartwarming and chaotic. Tom approached the reception desk where a nurse was fielding phone calls from what sounded like news reporters who had already gotten wind of the story. "I'm Tom Morrison," he told the nurse during a brief pause in her phone conversations. The one who found the little girl. I'd like to check on how she's doing." The nurse, whose name tag read Betty, looked up with tired but grateful eyes. "Mr. Morrison, thank goodness. The doctors have been hoping to speak with you. The child has been asking for you, and something about a horse." Tom was led through a maze of hospital corridors to the pediatric wing, where he found Lucy's room. Through the partially open door, he could see a scene that made his heart both heavy and hopeful at the same time. Lucy was awake and sitting up in bed, connected to an IV that was slowly rehydrating her small body. But what caught Tom's attention immediately was the crowd of people surrounding her bed. A man and woman who were obviously her parents sat on either side of her, holding her hands and crying tears of relief. Two other adults, probably grandparents, stood nearby with expressions of pure joy and gratitude. "Tom," Lucy called out when she spotted him in the doorway. Her voice was stronger now, though still hoarse from her ordeal. "Is my horsey okay? Where is she?" Lucy's father, a man in his 30s with worried eyes and several days' worth of stubble, stood up and walked over to Tom. "You must be the man who found our daughter," he said, extending his hand. "I'm David Chun. This is my wife Linda and Lucy's grandparents. We can never thank you enough for what you did." Tom shook David's hand, feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the gratitude in the man's eyes. "I'm just glad I found her in time," Tom replied. "But honestly, sir, I can't take credit for the rescue. That belongs to the horse that's been taking care of your daughter." Linda Chun, a petite woman with tears still streaming down her face, looked up from Lucy's bedside. "Lucy keeps talking about a horse, but we're having trouble understanding what happened." The doctor said she was severely dehydrated but otherwise unharmed. How is that possible after being lost for 6 days? Tom pulled up a chair and sat down, knowing this conversation was going to be difficult to believe. Mrs. Chun, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I promise you it's the truth. For the next 20 minutes, Tom carefully explained everything that had happened. He described the Murray's condition when she appeared at the ranch, her insistent behavior at the barn door, and the makeshift shelter where Lucy had been protected. He told them about the evidence of the horse bringing water to Lucy and the way she had refused to leave the child's side. Lucy's grandfather, an elderly man with silver hair and kind eyes, listened intently to every word. You're saying a wild horse found our granddaughter and took care of her for almost a week? That's exactly what I'm saying, Tom replied. And I know how crazy it sounds, but the evidence is all there. The horse created a shelter, brought her water, and kept her warm. Without that mare, Lucy wouldn't have survived. Dr. Martinez, the attending physician, had been listening from the doorway. She stepped into the room with Lucy's medical chart in her hands. Mr. Morrison, I have to say that Lucy's condition supports your story. Despite being lost for 6 days, she shows signs of having had access to water regularly. Her electrolyte levels suggest she wasn't completely without liquid the entire time. Lucy had been listening to the adult conversation with the serious expression that children sometimes get when they realize adults are discussing something important about them. Now she spoke up in her clear, honest voice. The horsey found me when I was scared and hurt, Lucy said. I fell down a big hill and couldn't get back up. I was crying because my leg hurt and I couldn't find you and Daddy. Then the horsey came and she was hurt too, but she helped me anyway. The room fell silent as everyone focused on Lucy's words. Even though she was only 7 years old, her account was detailed and consistent. She brought me water in her mouth. Lucy continued. It was yucky at first because it tasted like horse, but I was so thirsty. And when it got cold at night, she would lay down next to me and keep me warm. She would put her head on me like a big blanket. Linda Chen covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed by the image of her daughter being protected by a wild animal. Honey, weren't you scared of such a big horse? Lucy shook her head emphatically. No, Mommy, she had nice eyes. And she was hurt worse than me, but she still took care of me. She would go away sometimes, but she always came back. I think she was looking for help. David Chun looked at Tom with an expression of wonder and gratitude. Where is this horse now? We need to do something for her. We can't just let her go back to being wild after what she did for our daughter. Tom felt a sense of relief that Lucy's family understood the magnitude of what the Mare had done. She's outside in my truck. She's got some bad injuries that need attention, but she refused to be left behind. I think she wanted to make sure Lucy was going to be okay. Dr. Martinez spoke up again. Mr. Morrison, I know this might sound unusual, but would it be possible for Lucy to see the horse? She's been asking about her constantly, and I think it might help with her emotional recovery to know the animal is safe. Tom looked around the room at Lucy's family. That's up to you, folks. The horse is gentle, but she's still a wild animal. Though after what I've seen her do, I'm not sure wild is the right word anymore. Lucy's eyes lit up with hope. Please, Daddy. I want to see her and tell her thank you. She saved my life. David and Linda exchanged a look that parents share when they're trying to make a decision that involves their child's safety and happiness. Finally, David nodded. If the doctors think it's safe, and if you think the horse won't be stressed by it, then yes, our daughter is right. We all owe that animal more than we can ever repay. As plans were made to carefully introduce Lucy to her protector, Tom realized that this was just the beginning of a story that would challenge everything people thought they knew about the bond between humans and animals. The next few hours would reveal just how deep that bond had become. The hospital staff had never dealt with a request quite like this one. Dr. Martinez spent 20 minutes on the phone with the hospital administrator, explaining why they needed to bend the rules about animals on hospital property. Meanwhile, Tom worked with the nursing staff to figure out the safest way to bring Lucy outside to see the Mare. Lucy's excitement was barely contained as the nurses helped her into a wheelchair. The forebag was attached to a portable stand, and despite her weakened condition, her eyes sparkled with anticipation. Her parents walked alongside her, still processing the incredible story they had heard. "Now, remember, honey," Linda said gently, "the horse has been through a lot too. We need to be very quiet and calm so we don't scare her," Lucy nodded seriously. "I know, Mommy. She doesn't like loud noises. When I cried too much, she would get worried." The group made their way through the hospital corridors and out through a side exit that led to the parking area where Tom had left his truck. The cool evening air was a welcome change from the sterile hospital atmosphere, and Lucy took a deep breath, smiling for the first time since her rescue. As they approached the truck, Tom could see the Murray's head raised high, her ears pointed forward. She had heard their voices and was already looking in their direction. The moment Lucy came into view, the horse began making soft, nickering sounds, the kind of gentle calls that horses use to communicate with their young. "She remembers me," Lucy whispered, her voice filled with wonder. The Murray was standing as close to the front of the truck bed as possible, stretching her neck toward the approaching group. Despite her injuries and obvious exhaustion, her entire focus was on the little girl in the wheelchair. Tom lowered the truck's tailgate carefully, speaking in soothing tones to keep the Murray calm. "Easy, girl. Lucy's here, and she's safe. You did good, real good." What happened next left everyone speechless. The Murray, despite her injured leg and weakened condition, carefully stepped down from the truck bed. She moved slowly and deliberately toward Lucy, stopping just a few feet away and lowering her massive head to the child's level. Lucy reached out with both hands and placed them gently on the Murray's nose. The horse closed her eyes and leaned into the touch, as if she had been waiting for this moment since they had been separated. "Thank you," Lucy whispered to the Murray. "Thank you for staying with me and keeping me safe." David Chun pulled out his phone and began recording the reunion, tears streaming down his face. "I want to remember this forever," he said quietly. "I want Lucy to have this when she's older, so she always know how special this is." Dr. Martinez had followed them outside and was watching the interaction with professional interest. "In 30 years of medicine, I've never seen anything like this," she told Tom. "The bond between them is remarkable." But Tom was focused on the Murray's condition. Up close, under the parking lot lights, her injuries looked even worse than they had at the ranch. The cut on her leg was definitely infected, and she was favoring it heavily. She had several deep scratches along her flanks that needed attention, and she was clearly underweight from the ordeal. "We need to get her to a veterinarian," Tom said. "She's been putting all her energy into taking care of Lucy, but now she needs help herself." Linda Chen looked at her husband with an expression that Tom recognized. It was the same look his own wife had given him years ago when they had found a stray dog that needed help. It was the look of someone who had already made a decision, even if they hadn't said it out loud yet. "David," Linda said softly, "we can't just let her go back to the wild. Not after what she did for our baby." David nodded, his businessman's mind already working through the practical details. "You're right, but what do we do? We live in the city. We don't have anywhere to keep a horse." Tom had been thinking about this same problem during the drive to the hospital. "There might be a solution," he said carefully. "Mr. Rodriguez, my boss at the ranch, has been talking about getting more horses, and I've been around horses my whole life. If you folks were willing, we could take care of her at the ranch. That way, Lucy could visit whenever she wanted." Lucy's face lit up at this suggestion. "Really? Could I see her again?" "As often as your parents will let you," Tom promised. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles pulling into the parking lot. A local news van was followed by 2 sheriff's department cars and what looked like a truck from Animal Control. Officer Williams emerged from one of the patrol cars and walked over to the group. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but word about this story has gotten out. The local news wants to do an interview, and Animal Control wants to examine the horse." Tom felt a moment of panic. Animal Control could decide that the Murray was a dangerous wild animal that needed to be removed from human contact. After everything she had done, the idea of her being taken away and possibly put down was unbearable. Dr. Hamilton from Animal Control was a serious-looking woman in her 50s who approached the mare with professional caution. But as she got closer and saw the gentle interaction between the horse and Lucy, her expression softened. "This is the horse that protected the child?" Dr. Hamilton asked. "For 6 days," Tom confirmed. "She brought her water, kept her warm, and then led me to where the child was hidden." Dr. Hamilton walked slowly around the mare, examining her condition and behavior. The horse remained calm throughout the inspection, seeming to understand that this woman was trying to help. "She's definitely been living wild," Dr. Hamilton said finally, "but she's not feral. Someone trained this horse at some point. She's too comfortable around humans and too gentle in her responses." This revelation added another layer to the mystery. If the mare had been trained, where had she come from? How had she ended up living? In the wild? And why had she chosen to risk everything to save a human child? The news reporter, a young woman with a camera crew, approached the group with excitement. "This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We'd like to do a story about this incredible rescue. Would you be willing to speak with us?" David and Linda looked at each other, then at Lucy. "What do you think, sweetheart?" David asked. "Do you want to tell people about your horsey?" Lucy nodded eagerly. "I want everyone to know how brave she is." As the news crew set up their equipment, Tom made phone calls to arrange emergency veterinary care for the mare. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a large animal veterinarian who worked with the local ranches, agreed to meet them at her clinic despite the late hour. The news interview was brief but powerful. Lucy, despite her exhaustion, spoke clearly about how the horse had saved her life. Her innocent words and obvious love for the mare created a story that would soon capture hearts across the country. But for Tom, the most important thing was getting the mare the medical attention she desperately needed. As they prepared to transport her to the veterinary clinic, he realized that this was just the beginning of a journey that would change all their lives forever. The hospital staff had never dealt with a request quite like this one. Dr. Martinez spent 20 minutes on the phone with the hospital administrator, explaining why they needed to bend the rules about animals on hospital property. Meanwhile, Tom worked with the nursing staff to figure out the safest way to bring Lucy outside to see the mare. Lucy's excitement was barely contained as the nurses helped her into a wheelchair. The four-bag was attached to a portable stand, and despite her weakened condition, her eyes sparkled with anticipation. Her parents walked alongside her, still processing the incredible story they had heard. "Now remember, honey," Linda said gently, "the horse has been through a lot too. We need to be very quiet and calm so we don't scare her." Lucy nodded seriously. "I know, Mommy. She doesn't like loud noises. When I cried too much, she would get worried." The group made their way through the hospital corridors and out through a side exit that led to the parking area where Tom had left his truck. The cool evening air was a welcome change from the sterile hospital atmosphere, and Lucy took a deep breath, smiling for the first time since her rescue. As they approached the truck, Tom could see the mare's head raised high, her ears pointed forward. She had heard their voices and was already looking in their direction. The moment Lucy came into view, the horse began making soft nickering sounds, the kind of gentle calls that horses use to communicate with their young. "She remembers me," Lucy whispered. Her voice filled with wonder. The mare was standing as close to the front of the truck bed as possible, stretching her neck toward the approaching group. Despite her injuries and obvious exhaustion, her entire focus was on the little girl in the wheelchair. Tom lowered the truck's tailgate carefully, speaking in soothing tones to keep the mare calm. "Easy, girl. Lucy's here, and she's safe. You did good, real good." What happened next left everyone speechless. The mare, despite her injured leg and weakened condition, carefully stepped down from the truck bed. She moved slowly and deliberately toward Lucy, stopping just a few feet away and lowering her massive head to the child's level. Lucy reached out with both hands and placed them gently on the mare's nose. The horse closed her eyes and leaned into the touch, as if she had been waiting for this moment since they had been separated. "Thank you," Lucy whispered to the mare. Thank you for staying with me and keeping me safe. David Chung pulled out his phone and began recording the reunion, tears streaming down his face. I want to remember this forever, he said quietly. I want Lucy to have this when she's older, so she always know how special this is. Dr. Martinez had followed them outside and was watching the interaction with professional interest. In 30 years of medicine, I've never seen anything like this, she told Tom. The bond between them is remarkable. But Tom was focused on the Mare's condition. Up close, under the parking lot lights, her injuries looked even worse than they had at the ranch. The cut on her leg was definitely infected, and she was favoring it heavily. She had several deep scratches along her flanks that needed attention, and she was clearly underweight from the ordeal. We need to get her to a veterinarian, Tom said. She's been putting all her energy into taking care of Lucy, but now she needs help herself. Linda Shin looked at her husband with an expression that Tom recognized. It was the same look his own wife had given him years ago when they had found a stray dog that needed help. It was the look of someone who had already made a decision, even if they hadn't said it out loud yet. David, Linda said softly, we can't just let her go back to the wild. Not after what she did for our baby. David nodded, his businessman's mind already working through the practical details. You're right, but what do? We live in the city, we don't have anywhere to keep a horse. Tom had been thinking about this same problem during the drive to the hospital. There might be a solution, he said carefully. Mr. Rodriguez, my boss at the ranch, has been talking about getting more horses, and I've been around horses my whole life. If you folks were willing, we could take care of her at the ranch. That way, Lucy could visit whenever she wanted. Lucy's face lit up at this suggestion. Really? Could I see her again? As often as your parents will let you, Tom promised. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles pulling into the parking lot. A local news van was followed by 2 sheriff's department cars and what looked like a truck from Animal Control. Officer Williams emerged from one of the patrol cars and walked over to the group. Sorry to interrupt, he said, but word about this story has gotten out. The local news wants to do an interview and Animal Control wants to examine the horse. Tom felt a moment of panic. Animal Control could decide that the Mare was a dangerous wild animal that needed to be removed from human contact. After everything she had done, the idea of her being taken away and possibly put down was unbearable. Dr. Hamilton from Animal Control was a serious-looking woman in her 50s who approached the Mare with professional caution. But as she got closer and saw the gentle interaction between the horse and Lucy, her expression softened. This is the horse that protected the child? Dr. Hamilton asked. For 6 days, Tom confirmed. She brought her water, kept her warm, and then led me to where the child was hidden. Dr. Hamilton walked slowly around the Mare, examining her condition and behavior. The horse remained calm throughout the inspection, seeming to understand that this woman was trying to help. She's definitely been living wild, Dr. Hamilton said finally, but she's not feral. Someone trained this horse at some point. She's too comfortable around humans and too gentle in her responses. This revelation added another layer to the mystery. If the Mare had been trained, where had she come from? How had she ended up living? In the wild? And why had she chosen to risk everything to save a human child? The news reporter, a young woman with a camera crew, approached the group with excitement. This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We'd like to do a story about this incredible rescue. Would you be willing to speak with us? David and Linda looked at each other, then at Lucy. What do you think, sweetheart? David asked. Do you want to tell people about your horsey? Lucy nodded eagerly. I want everyone to know how brave she is. As the news crew set up their equipment, Tom made phone calls to arrange emergency veterinary care for the Mare. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a large animal veterinarian who worked with the local ranches, agreed to meet them at her clinic despite the late hour. The news interview was brief but powerful. Lucy, despite her exhaustion, spoke clearly about how the horse had saved her life. Her innocent words and obvious love for the Mare created a story that would soon capture hearts across the country. But for Tom, the most important thing was getting the mare the medical attention she desperately needed. As they prepared to transport her to the veterinary clinic, he realized that this was just the beginning of a journey that would change all their lives forever. The veterinary clinic was located 15 miles outside of town, and Dr. Mitchell had agreed to meet them there despite it being nearly midnight. Tom drove carefully through the winding country roads, constantly checking his rearview mirror to make sure the mare was handling the journey okay. David and Linda followed in their own car with Lucy, who had insisted on coming along despite the late hour and her need for rest. "I have to make sure she's going to be okay," Lucy had told the doctors with the stubborn determination that only a 7-year-old could muster when they arrived at the clinic. Dr. Mitchell was already there with the lights on and her equipment ready. She was a woman in her 40s who had been working with horses for over 20 years, and Tom had called her specifically because of her reputation for handling difficult cases with patience and skill. "So, this is the famous rescue horse, Doctor," Mitchell said as she approached the truck. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The examination took over an hour. Dr. Mitchell worked methodically, cleaning and treating each of the mare's wounds while speaking to her in soft, reassuring tones. The infection in her leg was worse than it had looked, and she needed antibiotics immediately. Several of the cuts on her sides were deep enough to require stitches. Throughout the entire examination, the mare stood patiently, as if she understood that these humans were trying to help her. Occasionally she would look toward the clinic window where Lucy was watching from inside, and her ears would perk forward with interest. "She's been through quite an ordeal," Dr. Mitchell told the group as she worked. "These injuries are at least a week old, some maybe longer. The fact that she was able to care for a child in this condition is remarkable." As Dr. Mitchell treated the mare's wounds, she made an observation that surprised everyone. "This horse has definitely been professionally trained," she said. "Look at how she responds to verbal commands and gentle pressure. Someone spent a lot of time working with her." Tom had suspected this might be the case, but hearing it confirmed raised new questions. "Could she be someone's missing horse?" he asked. "It's possible," Dr. Mitchell replied. "I'll check the database of missing animals in the morning. But even if she belongs to someone, the fact remains that she chose to save that little girl's life. That says something about her character." While the veterinarian worked, David and Linda sat with Lucy in the clinic's waiting room. The morning sun was just beginning to warm the ranch when Tom woke up in the chair outside the mare's stall. He had dozed off sometime around 4 in the morning, but his internal clock had woken him early as it always did. The first thing he did was check on his patient. The mare was standing quietly in her stall, and Tom was relieved to see that she looked more alert than she had the night before. Her ears perked forward when she saw him, and she moved closer to the stall door with only a slight limp. The antibiotics were already starting to work. "Good morning, girl," Tom said softly, offering her a handful of grain. "Feeling a little better today?" For the first time since he had met her, the mare showed genuine interest in food. She ate the grain carefully from his palm, and Tom took this as a good sign. When horses started eating normally again, it usually meant they were on the road to recovery. Mr. Rodriguez appeared with 2 cups of coffee and the morning newspaper tucked under his arm. "How's our patient doing?" he asked, handing Tom one of the steaming cups. "Better, I think," Tom replied. "She ate some grain, and she's moving around more easily. Dr. Mitchell was right about her being strong." Mr. Rodriguez unfolded the newspaper, and Tom nearly choked on his coffee when he saw the front page. There was a large color photograph of Lucy touching the mare's nose in the hospital parking lot, with the headline, "Miracle Mare Saves Lost Child." "We're famous," Mr. Rodriguez said with a chuckle. "The phone's been ringing all morning. Reporters, TV stations, even some people who claim they might know where this horse came from." Tom felt a mix of pride and concern. He was glad that people were hearing about the mare's heroic actions, but he worried about what all the attention might mean for her recovery. "What kind of calls about where she came from?" "A woman named Patricia Williams called about an hour ago," Mr. Rodriguez said, consulting a notepad. "She lives about 40 miles north of here, near the National Forest. says she had a horse go missing about 3 months ago that matches this one's description. Tom's heart sank a little. He had grown attached to the mare over the past day, and the thought of her belonging to someone else was disappointing. But if she had a family looking for her, that was more important than his feelings. Did she give any details? Tom asked. She said the horse's name is Star, and that she disappeared during a thunderstorm in early spring. Patricia and her husband searched for weeks but never found any trace of her. Star, the name seemed to fit the brave mare perfectly. Tom looked at her thoughtfully, wondering if she would respond to it. Star, he said gently. The mare's ears immediately pricked forward, and she turned her head to look directly at him. There was recognition in her eyes, and Tom felt a bittersweet mixture of satisfaction and sadness. I guess we know her name now, Tom said quietly. The sound of car engines interrupted their conversation. Through the barn doors, Tom could see several vehicles pulling into the ranch driveway. The Ching family's car was followed by what looked like a news van, and another truck he didn't recognize. Lucy was the first one out of her family's car, moving much more quickly than she had the night before. Despite everything she had been through, she seemed to have bounced back with the resilience that children often showed. "Where's my horsey?" Lucy called out as she ran toward the barn, her parents hurrying to keep up with her. "She's right here, sweetheart," Tom said, opening the stall door slightly so Lucy could see Star better. "And we found out her name. It's Star." Lucy's face lit up with delight. "Star, that's a perfect name for her. Stars help people find their way when they're lost, just like she helped me." The simple wisdom of Lucy's observation struck everyone present. Star had indeed been like a guiding star, leading Lucy to safety and then leading Tom to both of them. The news crew was setting up their equipment in the yard, and Tom could see the reporter from the night before directing her cameraman. But his attention was drawn to the third vehicle, from which emerged a woman in her 60s with graying hair and tears in her eyes. "That's got to be Patricia Williams," Mr. Rodriguez murmured. The woman approached the group hesitantly, as if she was afraid of what she might find. When she reached the barn entrance and saw Star, she stopped completely and covered her mouth. "With her hands? Star?" she called softly. The mare's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. She whinnied loudly and moved to the front of the stall, pressing her nose against the bars. Her entire body language changed from calm alertness to excited recognition. Patricia Williams was crying openly now as she approached the stall. "Oh, Star, baby, where have you been?" "We looked everywhere for you." Tom felt his heart break a little as he watched the reunion. It was clear that Star and Patricia had a strong bond, and he knew that the right thing to do was to return the horse to her original family. But it was going to be hard to explain to Lucy. Lucy, however, surprised everyone with her reaction. Instead of being upset, she looked thoughtful as she watched Star's happy response to Patricia. "She knows you," Lucy said to Patricia. "She missed you, didn't she?" Patricia knelt down to Lucy's level, wiping tears from her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, she did, and I missed her terribly. But I want you to know that I'm so proud of her for taking care of you. She's always been special, but what she did for you makes her a hero." Lucy nodded seriously. "She is a hero. She saved my life." Patricia stood up and looked at Tom. "I can't thank you enough for taking care of her. When I saw the news story this morning, I couldn't believe it was really Star. I thought I'd lost her forever." Tom was about to respond when David Chun stepped forward. "Mrs. Williams, I'm Lucy's father. I think we need to talk about something important." For the next hour, the adults had a conversation that would determine Star's future. Patricia explained how Star had been her late husband's favorite horse, trained as a therapy animal to work with children who had disabilities or trauma. She had been devastated when Star disappeared, not just because she loved the horse, but because Star had helped so many children over the years. David and Linda shared their gratitude for what Star had done for Lucy and their desire to somehow remain part of the horse's life. They explained how Lucy had formed an unbreakable bond with Star during their time together in the wilderness. Tom listened to the conversation with growing amazement. Star hadn't just randomly decided to help Lucy, her training as a therapy horse had prepared her to recognize a child in distress and to provide comfort and protection. Her actions in the forest had been the result of years of careful training combined with natural compassion. The solution that emerged from their discussion was more wonderful than anyone could have imagined. Patricia owned a small ranch that specialized in equine therapy for children. She had been struggling to continue the program after her husband's death and Star's disappearance, but now she saw new possibilities. What if, Patricia suggested, Star could continue her therapy work, and Lucy could be one of her first students? She could learn to ride and help with the other children who come to the ranch. Lucy's eyes grew wide with excitement. You mean I could see Star all the time and help other kids too? The arrangement they worked out would benefit everyone involved. Star would return to her home with Patricia, but the Sheen family would help support the therapy program. Lucy would spend weekends at the ranch, learning horsemanship and helping with younger children who needed Star's special kind of healing. Tom would visit regularly to check on Star's recovery and to help with the ranch work. The bond that had formed between all of them during this extraordinary experience would continue to grow and develop. As the news crew filmed the happy reunion and future plans, Tom realized that Star's story was far from over. She had found her way home, but she had also found a new purpose that would touch many more lives in the years to come. 3 weeks had passed since that incredible night when Star led Tom to Lucy in the barn. The story had spread far beyond their small town, capturing hearts across the country. Letters and cards arrived daily at Patricia's ranch from children and adults alike, all inspired by the tale of the horse who refused to give up on a lost little girl. Lucy had recovered completely from her ordeal and was stronger than ever. Every Saturday morning, David would drive her the 40 miles to Patricia's ranch, where she would spend the entire day with Star. These visits had become the highlight of both Lucy's and Star's weeks. On this particular Saturday, Tom was already at the ranch when the Chun family arrived. He had been coming every weekend to help Patricia with the ranch work and to check on Star's progress. The infected leg wound had healed perfectly, leaving only a small scar that served as a reminder of her heroic journey. "Star, I'm here!" Lucy called out as she ran toward the pasture where the mare was grazing. Star's head shot up immediately at the sound of Lucy's voice. Despite being in a field with 3 other horses, Star abandoned her breakfast and trotted directly to the fence, where Lucy was waiting. The bond between them had only grown stronger with time. "Look what I brought you," Lucy said, pulling a bag of carrots from her backpack. Star gently took each carrot from Lucy's small hands, her movements careful and deliberate around the child. Patricia watched from the porch of her ranch house, still amazed by the relationship between the horse and the little girl. "It's like they understand each other on a level that goes beyond normal communication," she told Tom as he joined her. Tom nodded, leaning against the porch railing. "I've been around horses my whole life, but I've never seen anything quite like what those two have." David and Linda Chun had also been watching their daughter with Star. Over the past few weeks, they had seen remarkable changes in Lucy. The trauma of being lost in the wilderness was healing, replaced by confidence and a deep love for horses. That Star had awakened in her. "Patricia," Linda said, approaching the older woman, "David and I have been talking about something. We'd like to make a more permanent arrangement if you're willing." Patricia invited them all to sit on the porch while Lucy continued her reunion with Star. What the Shun family proposed was both generous and practical. They wanted to purchase the property adjacent to Patricia's ranch, a 20-acre plot that had been for sale for months. "We could build a small house there," David explained. "Nothing fancy, just a weekend place where Lucy could be close to Star, and Linda could help you with the therapy program on a regular basis." Linda had been researching equine therapy since Star's rescue and had discovered she had a natural talent for working with children and horses. "I've been volunteering at a similar program in the city," she added. "I'd love to help you rebuild what you and your husband started here." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. Since her husband's death 2 years earlier, she had struggled to maintain the therapy program on her own. The combination of financial pressure and the physical demands of caring for multiple horses had been overwhelming. Star's disappearance had been the final blow that forced her to suspend the program. "You have no idea what this would mean to me," Patricia said. "Robert and I dreamed of expanding this program. We believed that horses like Star could help heal children who had experienced trauma, just like she helped Lucy." Tom had been quietly listening to the conversation, but now he spoke up. "If you folks are serious about this, I'd like to make an offer too. Mr. Rodriguez has been talking about semi-retirement, and he said he'd be willing to let me manage the Clearwater Ranch part-time. I could work here 3 days a week, helping with the horses and the maintenance." The plan that emerged from that afternoon's discussion was ambitious but achievable. The Sheen family would purchase the adjacent property and build a modest home there. Patricia would officially restart her therapy program with Linda as her partner and Tom as the ranch manager. Star would continue her therapy work, with Lucy as her special student and helper, but the most exciting part of the plan was yet to be revealed. Patricia led them to her husband's old office, which had been closed up since his death. Inside were files and photos documenting years of therapy work, including detailed records of Star's training and accomplishments. "Star isn't just any therapy horse," Patricia explained, opening a thick folder. "She was specifically trained to work with children who had experienced trauma or were facing difficult medical treatments. She has an almost supernatural ability to sense when a child is in distress." The files contained dozens of photos showing Star working with children in wheelchairs, kids undergoing cancer treatment, and young people dealing with emotional trauma. In every picture, Star's gentle nature and intuitive understanding of each child's needs were evident. "This explains everything," Tom said, studying the photos. "Star didn't just randomly decide to help Lucy. She was doing exactly what she was trained to do, but in a wilderness setting instead of a controlled environment." Lucy had finished her visit with Star and had joined the adults in the office. She looked at the photos with fascination, seeing Star in a completely new light. "She helped all these kids?" Lucy asked, pointing to a picture of Star standing patiently, while a little boy in leg braces learned to brush her coat. "She did," Patricia confirmed. "And now she's going to help many more, starting with you." Over the next several months, the transformation of Patricia's ranch was remarkable. The Chun family's new house was built with large windows overlooking the pastures, so Lucy could see Star from her bedroom. Linda enrolled in a certification program for equine therapy and proved to be a natural at the work. Tom split his time between the two ranches, and Mr. Rodriguez was delighted with the arrangement. "That boy has found his calling," he told anyone who would listen. "He was born to work with horses and help people." The first new therapy session was scheduled for a month later, with Lucy serving as Star's demonstration partner. A group of local children who had experienced various forms of trauma would come to the ranch to meet Star and learn about the healing power of horses. Lucy had been practicing for weeks, learning proper riding techniques and how to help other children feel comfortable around horses. Her confidence had grown tremendously, and she had developed a maturity that impressed all the adults around her. "Are you nervous about helping with the other kids?" Linda asked her daughter the night before the first session. Lucy thought for a moment before answering. "A little bit. But Star will be there, and she knows how to help kids who are scared or sad. I just have to trust her like I did in the forest." The morning of the first therapy session dawned bright and clear. 5 children between the ages of 6 and 10 arrived at the ranch with their parents, all of them dealing with different challenges. Some had lost parents, others had been in accidents, and one little boy was undergoing treatment for leukemia. Star seemed to sense the importance of the day. She stood quietly in the round pen, wearing a soft halter and lead rope, waiting for her young visitors. Lucy stood beside her, wearing a special volunteer shirt that Patricia had made for her as the children approached hesitantly. Star demonstrated the same gentle patience she had shown with Lucy in the wilderness. She lowered her head to their level, allowed them to touch her soft nose, and stood perfectly still while they petted her neck, one by one. The children began to relax around Star. Their initial fear gave way to curiosity, then to delight as they discovered how responsive and gentle the big horse could be, Lucy watched with pride as Star worked her magic once again, knowing that this was just the beginning of many lives that would be touched by the horse who had saved her own.